Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to our /EntitledPeople, where people truly believe they're the center of the universe and they can do what they want when they want. And in today's episode, we've got Karens abandoning their kids in stores, entitled coworkers, family members, horrible exes, and one OP tells the story about the time they were attacked by a Karen employee for looking like a thief. The stories are wild in this one. I hope you enjoy the stories, don't shake your heads too hard, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So, we're going back in time to 2004, when I worked at a chain department store. I was 22 years old at the time, and I floated between the departments. That evening, I was covering the kids department by myself. Facing and folding, fixing the tables, checking the changing rooms, etc. A woman with 3 small kids, aged 3, 5, and 7 if I had to guess, was at a table, and they were pulling out shirts, holding them up, and then tossing them back into crumpled heaps, forming a pile. They were making a huge mess. The woman and her kids then move along. I fix the table, which takes some time, before returning to the counter, and I can hear the kids laughing and shrieking. Close to the counter in the kids section, we had a little round sitting area facing a wall of TVs. Various kid-friendly shows played on low volume on each screen. It was a chaotic scene to behold. The 3 kids were jumping and climbing all over the short benches. No mom in sight. I do a quick search and I can't find her. And this is when I get my manager and loss prevention is pulled in. We talk to the kids, who are super hyper, to get their mom's name. We call her over the loudspeaker and we wait. No one comes. Loss prevention then contacts mall security. They call her over loudspeaker. Well, 10 minutes later, the woman comes storming in, furious, holding a bag from another store and a huge cup from the food court in her hands. She demands to know why we called her. We explain the situation, with her kids being left unattended in the store, and she flips out, stating that girl, pointing at me, is there to watch the kids in the kids section, and that's why there's a big wall of TVs there. She then said something I'll never forget. She said that waiting room full of TVs is there so moms can go shopping stress-free. This is when loss prevention and my manager tells her that's not how it works. She then asks if we have any idea what it's like to go shopping with 3 kids in tow, and she's frothing at the mouth. At this point, her kids are tearing up tables again, running around screaming, having a blast. She's then asked to take her kids and leave, and that's when she throws her large cup of soda at the floor, causing it to explode all over the place. Before we can do anything else, she grabs her smallest child and shrieks at them that they're now leaving, that our store is the most horrible place she's ever been to, and that she'll be calling corporate to get us all fired. It's been 20 years, and sometimes I still wonder how those kids turned out. I hope they turned out all right. That's if they haven't been kidnapped or something, right? Like, guys, I will never understand why people just leave their kids alone in stores like this, especially at that young of age. And it's just so funny that the Karen mom defends herself by saying, well, how can I shop with my kids bugging me? Like, lady, how can you shop without being paranoid about where your 4-year-old is or who's around them? Like, am I too cautious or what? Like, maybe I've listened to way too much true crime lately and I've been too wary. But with people in the comments, apparently this was the thing to do back in the day. This person says, back in the olden days, my mother would leave us in the toy department and she would go shop. She would tell us to not go anywhere else and to behave. Most of the time, there were other kids whose moms had left them in the toy department to shop too. Of course, we never tore the place apart because being in the toy department without supervision was a luxury that we didn't want to lose by acting up, and we would have gotten our butts whacked. Different times. And this person says 15 years at Toys R Us. Every day, there seemed to be some parent using us as a daycare. We once found 2 boys, 8 and 9, hiding in our bathroom after closing. The mom forgot to pick them up. By the time the dad showed up, the cops and CPS were already there. He was at home on the couch when mom comes home and asked where the boys were. She completely forgot. Absolutely wild. Guys, let me know if your parents did something like this. And if you're listening and you're a parent, let me know if you've ever done this or if you would do something like this. So this happened just over 5 years ago, but I was thinking about it today. My pregnancy with my daughter was extremely unexpected. My husband and I, 25 at the time, had been told by our doctor that we were both medically infertile. We were given fertility medication, and we were told that we were looking at about 5 years until the ball was really rolling. Well, we got pregnant with our daughter the first month on medication. Surprise. Now, while unexpected, she was very wanted, and we were over the moon. Except my husband was unemployed at the time, and I was working as a high school teacher with pretty rough kids. My pregnancy was also awful. I had dizzy spells, and I was nauseous until my daughter was born. I was throwing up like 10 times a day, was hospitalized for dehydration 5 times, and I lost over 18 kilograms over the course of my pregnancy. Fun times. That said, in my department were 4 other teachers. Karens 1 to 3, and then Pete, the sweetest old guy you've ever met. The Karens were by the book, what you would find in Australian public education. They were catty, calcified, and bigoted. I called in sick at least once a week because of my rough pregnancy, and they were constantly making nasty comments about it, both to my face and to other departments, despite the fact that none of my work was ever left for them to do. It of course affected my professional life quite badly, and I often thought of quitting, despite having no real option to do so. So cue the trauma. The Karens insisted on weekly after-school meetings that lasted several hours, despite never covering more than a post-it note worth of info. I had missed several, and the alpha Karen demanded I come to the next one. Sitting in a stuffy room while the Karens went over the latest episode of a TV show, I felt a wave of nausea. I stood and excused myself, but alpha Karen moves to block the door. She then said that I could hold whatever it was for a minute, until we sorted out a detail in a planning document. This is when I asked Pete to pass me the bin at his feet, which he did eagerly, and I projectile vomited. Blood. You see, the constant spewing had irritated my throat enough that it bled every time I was sick. My doctor knew about it, and honestly, it looked a lot worse than it was. The Karen stood in silent horror as the pale, pregnant woman threw up blood in a bin, and Pete lets out a piercing scream. He shouted at them to call an ambulance, but that's when I waved them off saying, "This happens to me all the time." After the dry retching stopped, I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, smearing blood everywhere, and I asked if they still needed help with the document. They showed hesitance, so I grabbed my things and I leave. The Karens never bullied me again, and instead only spoke to me in the softest voices the rest of the year, as if I was dying. It was absolutely glorious. What a toxic workplace environment Opie had to deal with, but honestly it's so upsetting that in order to get some basic empathy and understanding, that Opie literally had to vomit blood. And you know what, I was really hoping that Opie was going to vomit all over Karen's shoes, but it seems like they got their point across regardless. Like, what kind of entitled, power-tripping fool does that, blocking a door so people can't leave when they need to? Okay, so I'm super pissed about what happened to me for multiple reasons, literally trembling just thinking about it. This happened on my lunch break as I drove to the other side of town to cash in my scratcher, and by the other side of town, I mean across the invisible border that separates areas that can sell scratchers and areas that can't. I drove to this place because I wanted a soda and some snacks. You know, a healthy lunch for a teacher. Now, usually I don't go here unless I want lottery tickets. It's a cool looking mom and pop place, but the second I stepped in, the cashier gave me an icy stare for some reason. And here's a little background. I have 3 of my 5 kids on the autism spectrum, and even though myself was never diagnosed as a child, I can guarantee that I have similar tendencies. Now, I have a feeling that my lack of proper eye contact might have something to do with the cashier's high noon stare, a realization that came to me the second I typed it. So as I'm walking into the place, I contemplated cashing the scratcher, which was a $5 win, but I decided that I'd wait to get my stuff and then cash it at the same time. In this indecisiveness, I found myself fumbling in my pockets and feeling to make sure I had my car keys, which is a nervous habit I have. I probably check once every 15 minutes, whether I'm at home, on the road, or sometimes even sleeping. And I can't tell you how many times I checked my pockets, but I can tell you that someone staring at me increases the frequency. I picked my items mentally, but yet again, I checked my pockets to see if I have enough change plus the $5 to pay for the items. It felt like I had enough, and I want to use this as a math problem for my students as I return. I'm deep in thought about this problem when I hear yelling or something that sounds like blah blah blah, I'm calling the police. This is when I look up, and I see a lady marching right up to my face, repeating herself, saying, "Empty your pockets or I'm calling the police." Now, this was borderline funny, as I thought she was joking or something, thinking it's a practical joke. I kind of laughed, but that's when she grabbed me and she dug her nails into my arm. And here's the thing, I like to consider my pain threshold pretty good, but this woman was seriously hurting me, trying to drag me someplace. I went along with her and I told her, "Hey, calm the F down here," as I pull away from her increasingly painful grasp. She then yells at me again saying, "Empty your pockets, don't make me call police." I took this moment to think to myself, oh crap, I'd better empty my pockets right now before this gets out of hand. And it was already way out of hand, but it took me a beat to realize. I quickly start emptying my pockets, which had 32 pieces of a ripped up scratcher, 3 receipts, my wallet, a straw wrapper, and with everything I took out of my pockets, I smacked it on her checkout area, saying, "See, this isn't your stuff, this isn't your stuff, this, oh wait, that's not your stuff." And when I got through almost everything, I realized I was acting out of anger and physical pain, and that I should probably take it down a notch. At this point, her entire counter was covered in absolute garbage, mixed with about 5% of the surface area representing stuff I need. Now she's got a mess to clean up, but that's just the beginning. I then start emptying my shirt pocket, where I had my teacher ID, my pens, my whiteboard marker, and then I spread my arms out as if to say, "Would you like to check anywhere else? I'm clean." She just kept shaking her head at me, and then shaking her head to someone off in the distance. And then the cops rolled up. I can't believe she called the police. As the car pulls up, I couldn't explain to you how glorious this is, because we, the lady and I, both had satisfying grins on our faces. Her, because she thought I was done for and she told me, "Now we'll really search you." And me, because it's none other than my school resource officer. Anyways, the officer walks in, and I was about to say something witty, but he beat me to the punch by saying, "Davis, are you holding up another liquor store?" with that dopey smile he always has. I tell him, "Hey, I emptied my pockets. If you're willing to search me, just..." He stops me and says, "That won't be necessary." He just continued rattling off his cop spiel and then turns to the lady and says, "Ma'am, can I ask you a few questions?" At which time, he returned to me, about to tell me something. And that's when he sees my arm, and he says, "How the hell did that happen?" I just say, "Yeah, you might want to check the camera on that one." He then turns to the woman, and he told her to follow him. By this time, a second police car arrived at the scene. She had an exchange with the officer, and then the new officer came to talk with me. She asked me the typical questions: when I got there, whether I'd been there earlier that day, if I knew that woman before today, etc. I guess thinking about it, it wasn't exactly a streamlined series of questions, but whatever. She then asked me if I wanted to press charges against this woman, and despite the feeling of pain still throbbing through, all the while pumping my blood to my increasingly annoying headache, I simply told her, "Oh, that's not necessary, as long as she knows I'm not a thief." I wish I could have seen the look on her face when she realized she was the one about to go to jail instead of me, but I did get to see her sitting in the back of the squad car. Now, I could describe a woman who was repeatedly shaking her head in anger and flailing about. I could portray a cold, callous woman who's ready for her sentence to be served and to get it over with. I could tell you that she was flooding the car with her tears, but all of these depictions are painfully incorrect. It was so anticlimactic. The woman just sat there, no anger, no visible emotion whatsoever. She got released from her zip-tied wrists, grabbing a waiting piece of paper from the officer. She then locked the store doors and she nonchalantly walked to her vehicle. While all of this was happening, Officer 2 asked me some more questions, almost trying to talk me into pressing charges, and then handing me a victim's rights pamphlet. I guess in case I changed my mind and I want to make this woman's life miserable. What happened to OP was absolutely outrageous, and on top of being fired, charges should have been laid. Like, this was assault resulting in injury, and there really are better ways she could have handled this situation. That said though, that Karen employee was super duper brave for doing that to someone whom she suspected was shoplifting. Like, if OP was a real thief, like, who knows what they could have had in their pockets to defend themselves, right? When I was 14 and my oldest sister Sarah was 22, we found out that she was pregnant with Paul, her boyfriend of 4 years. They immediately got engaged and they were really happy. For a time, Sarah had a horrible pregnancy. About 16 to 18 weeks in, the wonder of creating a human life evaporated within her. She developed really bad morning sickness, and she was constantly in pain, got gestational diabetes, just all around hated the experience. Around this time, Paul, the then fiancé, started getting sick of her complaining. I believe the argument was, your body is built to do this, it can't be that bad, so stop complaining. Sarah was due around Valentine's Day, and Paul's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Doe, were very excited, both about the grandkid and the fact that he could be born on a holiday. She was very against that, and she really hoped her son wouldn't be born that day. A holiday, even as small as Valentine's Day, might make him feel that his day isn't very much about him. Well, Mrs. Doe then says something like, well, if you name him Valentine or Valentino, then that'll make this day even more special to him. Again, my sister hated the idea. She thought it was tacky, that he'd be bullied for it, and she just really didn't like the name Valentino. Now, Paul did love it, but he agreed to go with an average name like Daniel or Jared. So fast forward to February, and she was ready to get this over with. Sarah had officially been put on bed rest because while standing or walking, her blood pressure took unexpected spikes and dips. I look back now, and goodness do I feel bad for her. She was doing her best to avoid giving birth on Valentine's Day because, again, she didn't want him born on a holiday. Unfortunately, births happen when they happen, and that baby was going to come Valentine's Day, whether she wanted him to or not. I remember waiting out in the waiting room with my dad, brothers, and Paul, who couldn't stand to be in the delivery room because it was gross. Now, I was so mad that he could have gone in, but wouldn't, because he thought my sister was gross while giving birth, whereas I had to stay outside because I was too young to go in with my mom and other sister. My dad went home with the youngest 2 brothers, while the oldest, Zeke, stayed to watch me because I refused to leave. 16 hours after Sarah goes into labor, my little nephew was officially a part of the family on the evening of Valentine's Day. Unfortunately, my sister was not okay. She had to have an emergency C-section, and while doing the operation, she discovered that the back of her uterus, facing her spinal cord, had a very large and very severe, thankfully non-cancerous, tumor. And when I say large, I mean it was twice the size of a standard uterus. The doctors were shocked, and they don't understand why nobody had noticed it on an ultrasound. It accounted for her severe back pain and blood pressure issues. The doctors immediately went in for more surgery to remove the tumor, but sadly ended up having to perform a full hysterectomy. This meant that my nephew would be Sarah's only child. Now, while Sarah was in for surgery, Paul was taking care of everything baby-related to make sure his son was okay. In my 14-year-old self's memory, I remember him being super distraught, but I didn't really pay him much mind, and I spent my time in the waiting room with my mother and other sister. My brother Zeke, however, wanted to be a good future brother-in-law and make sure that Paul was okay. He found Paul filling out the baby paperwork on his own, looking like he had not a single worry on his mind. Zeke asked why Paul didn't wait for Sarah to fill out the paperwork, as she would have been out of surgery within the hour, and Paul said he just wanted her to get rest and heal. That checked out with Zeke, as he was 16 and he didn't know better at the time. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. No, he wouldn't. He knows how much she hates that name, and still, she would need to sign the paperwork too. Well, I regret to inform you that Paul forges Sarah's signature on the paperwork and waited until she was out of surgery to hand said paperwork over. My sweet nephew, the one that was born on Valentine's Day, was named Valentino on his official birth certificate. And still to this day, I don't know why Paul and his family were so insistent about the name. He had even picked out a different one with my sister. And before you ask, no, he was never brought up on forgery charges because his parents were witnesses to her signing the papers, even though they only got there last minute. So Sarah dumps him and got her son's name changed a month later. She was willing to do a split custody with him because that's her son's father and she wants her kid to know him. But Paul vanished and she never heard anything back, which seemed weirdly out of character to us. Until a mutual friend on Facebook was tagged in his wedding pictures 6 months later. Paul had apparently started cheating on her not long after she got pregnant. Sarah was livid, but there wasn't much she could do, so she filed for child support and she continued to live her best life. That is, until 6 years later. And this is where she gets back at him. So Sarah's been a single mom for the past 6 years, and she's been amazing at it. At this point in my career, I've been a hairdresser for about 8 months at the local Great Clips. I'm working one day, and who's seated before me but Jane, Paul's wife herself. I take her back for a trim, and she clearly has no idea who I am. That adds up, because a mutual friend that still keeps in contact with Paul says Jane doesn't know a thing. She has no idea about Sarah, that she was the other woman, or that Paul actually has a kid that he's been infrequently paying child support for. She's in the dark on it all. I told myself to not be an ass and treat her like a normal customer, which I did. Now at this point, Jane was heavily pregnant, so a lot of our conversation was about that. She told me she loved being pregnant, but it was hard, and her husband was so unsympathetic. Big shocker. And she was due in 10 weeks, and they still hadn't picked out a name for their baby girl. And ladies and gentle peoples, this was my chance. I then asked what kind of name she was looking for, and she said, I want something unique and unusual, but not ridiculous like Braylin or something. You know the ones I'm talking about. And that Paul had suggested so many already, and she doesn't like any of them. So I, a conniving weasel I am, said, what about Sarah? Now, my sister's name isn't actually Sarah. It's changed in this story to keep her identity hidden, but she was named after an older family member that passed not long after she was born. But there was no female equivalent for his name, so our parents created one. It's a beautiful name, and just what Jane was looking for. She loved it, she stuck by it, and I found out by stalking her Facebook months later that she had put her foot down about it, and that was her daughter's name. Now Paul has a daughter with his ex's name to remind him every day about her, and to also remind him to pay his effing child support. My little nephew is 10 years old now with a new name, and he's got no contact with his biological father, even though sometimes we do call him Val as a family nickname. He likes it, but he doesn't want to bring it to school, so it's staying a family nickname. Sarah pretends to hate when we call him that in a joking way. As long as he likes it, she doesn't have a problem with it. Also, she's seeing a new guy who's really great, and he's like a father to Val. What Obi did was so brilliant, and the best part is, Paul has to live with it forever. Like, there was no way he could have given a reason for going against that name without throwing himself under the bus. Like, what a great way to get back at Paul, and honestly, I hope that scum recoils every time he hears his daughter's name. But at the same time, I hope he really loves his daughter. And guys, speaking of a-holes, Opie wants to know if she's one in this next post. So I'm a 17-year-old female, and I still live at home. My sister, who's 28, is married, and she's got 2 kids, 5 and 3. Whenever she comes over to visit, my parents and her stick me with the kids. Now this wouldn't be a problem, except she doesn't visit for an evening. She'll come for a week, and for that week, I'm an unpaid nanny. If we go out to a restaurant, I have to entertain them, because my mom needs to talk to my sister and brother-in-law. You get the picture. So my parents decided that since this was the last summer before I become an adult, we would be going to Disneyland to celebrate my graduation. I asked who was going, and they said just the 3 of us. But when we got to the airport, my sister and her family were there. And strangely enough, they were also going to Disneyland. This is when I went into my backpack and I grabbed my passport. I put it into my sock. When we got to international security, I pretended I couldn't find it. We looked everywhere. I had to Uber home and I missed my flight. And I thought to myself, oh well, I get to stay home by myself for a week of peace and quiet. My parents were very, very mad at me for losing my passport. The money they spent on my flight and entrance was wasted. My mom and sister have both been posting how hard it is to be at Disneyland with 2 little ones. They both posted that I ruined the vacation by being so careless and losing my passport. I feel bad about wasting money, but I have been to Disneyland before, and I'll go again later by myself or with my friends. So am I the a-hole for wasting my family's money? In my opinion, heck no, because that would not have been enjoyable for OP at all. Imagine thinking a trip is all planned for you, but to find out that you're only there to be a babysitter. The family is such an a-hole in the situation for doing this to OP. And it's only fair that they waste a little bit of money and have the trip they deserve. That said though, I don't know why the trip was ruined. I mean, parents take their kids to Disneyland all the time without a babysitter, and they're fine, right? Maybe the sister should parent her kids a little bit better, and vacations would actually be enjoyable and not ruined. That's a thought. But guys, let me know what you would do. Pretty clever what OP did, but would you be doing the same if you were in their position? And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/EntitledPeople. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/malicious compliance episode, where OP tells a story about their horrible boss that ends up getting canned, despite thinking he's absolutely invincible. Go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.